Hello, art historians, and welcome to our final lecture over African art, where we're mainly today going to be talking about African masks and the role that they play in African culture. And so we left our story kind of focused on the Congo, so that central area of Africa that had some of the worst abuses in it, and as a result, was probably one of the most misunderstood areas because the people coming from Europe weren't exactly focused on coming into the Congo and understanding the culture that was, there with those people. So the Congo, what I like to do with this part of the lecture is demonstrate that the Congo is actually a place, if we look at it, and we kind of saw this with the Nkisi and Kandi, like the power figures for ways of dealing with conflict, that the Congo was actually way more forward thinking, and Africa as a whole was much more forward thinking and ahead of their time. Actually, I don't even like to say ahead of their time because they'd kind of always been this way than the people from Europe who consider themselves to be such superior beings, right? So one thing I do want to really emphasize as you guys are reviewing for this test is they really like on the art history exam for you to be able to identify the specific group that a work of art is associated with. So for example, the veranda post is the Yoruba people, the Benin is the brass plaques. So just really kind of make sure you're taking note of those things as you go back through. And if you haven't done it for the other pieces, then you probably need to go back and make sure you got that. But right now we're going to focus on the Chokwe people of the Congo. And I like to really emphasize this particular group because like so many other places in Africa, they believed that females were as important, if not more important, than males were. A lot of people who were leaders traced their line back to their mothers. So kind of like along their mother's family line. And it was kind of this idea that women can give birth, like they can bring life. And that gave them kind of this sacred power that they had because they bring the next generation of kings in. It's not like in Europe where kings were getting divorced because or cutting people's heads off because they couldn't have sons. This was you brought life. Like it was this gift that women had. And it wasn't viewed as a negative thing if a girl was necessarily born. So this particular mask right here, right? So this is called the female Pwo, so PWO mask. So the female mask, right? Which actually was to honor revered female ancestors because what these women had done, if they are an ancestor, is they had survived giving birth, right? And I know this is really difficult for you guys to understand, but like it's one of the most painful things in the world that a woman can go through, especially if you're talking about without any kind of medication whatsoever, which these women were. A lot of women died in childbirth during this time and still do. I mean, in the United States, there's still a pretty high maternal death rate. But the fact that they had gone through this ordeal and were now able to bring life, like, and so if you so it's kind of like that quote from Spider-Man that with great power comes great responsibility. So if you were going to be this type of woman who gives birth and brings these new souls into the world, it's really very important that you uphold the standard of what a good female should be. Now, the female Pwo masks were actually worn by men. So this is a little bit backwards because only men could wear the mask. So they're made by men, they're worn by men, but they're actually meant to honor women. So there would be a dancing ceremony because remember, African art is not really decorative. There's always a function behind it. There's a deeper purpose behind it. And these masks of the Chokwe people would be worn in a ceremony with a male mask and a female mask, and they would dance in a way that ensured fertility and prosperity because male and female together was a positive thing because it brought new life. And it was also part of a ceremony where young girls were being initiated into adulthood because why would you do this? Well, they're going to be leaders in the village, they're going to be birthing children, they're going to be setting their example. So you want a virtuous woman to be bringing these, children into the world. And these masks were not meant to convey a particular person at all. They were meant to, I mean, sometimes they'd be a little bit individualized, but not really. They pretty much universally look the same way. And you can identify them as being Chokwe and these Pwo masks. And everything about them was meant to be an idea of what that, the ideal woman was. So notice that her skin is very smooth, so the wood would be very, very polished, usually with like some palm oil. rubbed over it. The hair would be a very, very soft fibers. And then the headband would be a little bit more rough because that kind of signifies like that the clothing is rough, but the woman herself is soft. And then you notice that the big eyes, okay, so huge eyes, that being able to see into that other world, like being able to, connect between this life and the next one and connect with ancestors because you want to base your, behavior on what these revered ancestors have done. You'll see that the eyes are slitted closed, the mouth is closed, kind of this idea of being very calm, serene, what a good woman would be. Like she doesn't get worked up, she doesn't gossip, she's not sticking her nose where it doesn't need to be. She's focused on the important things. And then that high forehead, that's something we see a lot in African art is, the bigger the forehead, the wiser the person. So these are stylized on purpose to kind of give an idea. It's not representing a person, it's representing an idea instead. So very common characteristics that you would see are a very high forehead. And then you notice that in the middle of the forehead and then right here underneath the cheeks, you see kind of these carved in shapes. And these were kind of ethnic symbols that you could recognize. And sometimes these women would have these scarred, like actually, cut into them where they would create scars so that the symbols would actually be there for them to recognize that it was this tribe and this group. And we'll talk more about that later. Then a lot of these statues or these masks, would have a tear of some kind. So like you can see that's the tears running out of her eyes kind of right here. And the tear, I think this is really beautiful. It kind of signifies that there is this separation happening at this point of life between mothers and sons and mothers and daughters, because it's this incredible thing. You've raised them, you've taken care of them, and you're so proud to see them go off on their own, but at the same time you're just heartbroken because they're no longer your babies. So you're proud, but it's also very sorrowful at the same time. Like it's this really deep emotion. But here is this woman who is still handling it with grace and dignity and knowing that she has put this child into the world for them to serve the best purpose possible, and she's set an incredible example for them. So her eyes and her mouth are closed. And then you've also got the lines around the eyes could mean a couple different things. It could be age lines, like to show age, that they have wisdom, that they know what they're talking about, that they are intelligent people. So kind of like smile lines, like, I'm getting older, I can start to see lines on my face from where I smile or where I squint, and it shows that I've lived through some things, I've considered some things. So this is a woman to be revered quite a bit. So this is actually the male mask, right? So like when they would do this dance for fertility rituals and like the coming of age, and that these masks, since they have to do fertility, have to do with revered female ancestors, that those ancestors may, since they survive childbirth, can bless that upon the village and can also, kind of fertility of food availability. So the male mask, if you look, is much rougher. Like it's much more hostile, and that's because it's the idea of what a male would be. It's a different kind of strength, right? So it's a woman who can actually, give birth, and then a male is stronger in terms of, fighting and being, a little bit harsher. So all of these masks, this female poil mask was to kind of demonstrate this idea of what a female should be. And here they are wearing these in these dances. But these would be men. So even the one on the left, that's a man. Even though it looks like a woman, it's a man wearing the mask. So having said that, that's why these Bundu masks that you can see right here from the Sunday Society. So it's an actual society. So, okay, let's back up. This is actually from the Mende people in Sierra Leone, okay, over on West Africa, all right? And there was within this culture a Sunday Society. And I just really think this is so cool because the Sunday Society was in charge of initiating females into womanhood in terms of, okay, this is what is going to be important for you to be as a woman in our society, what we value, and we want you to have those values too, all right? So this is really kind of crazy that this Sunday Society was all female within the Mende people, and this is the only mask that in this culture in Africa, basically that they found in general, that females wore. Like the women would actually wear these during an initiation society where a girl, and several girls actually, would be understanding of this is what it means. You're being initiated, you're being recognized as a woman, eligible for marriage. And basically, by participating in the ceremony, it shows that you now know what it takes to be a woman in this society because you're here. You've gone through the rituals, you've been there, you've seen it. So the Bundu masks, all right, are not supposed to be worn over the face. They're actually supposed to be worn sitting on top of the head. And if you look here, this raffia or these grasses would come over the face and over the body and would rustle as somebody would dance, right? And this raffia, all of this, material down here at the bottom, would hide the body. And so really it's the mask that you're focusing on during this dance and during this ceremony. And so Sierra Leone being near the water, it kind of has to do with like the water bringing life. So this, as you would move and this raffia would sway back and forth, it would kind of create that rustling sound of the water, all right? So when you look at this, all right, so it's a very polished, smooth, black color, right? And the idea being that that is what was considered beautiful in terms of the skin, all right, so beauty. But it also, because it is so smooth, represents the tranquility and coolness of the water, that women were supposed to be that cooling presence, but can also be very powerful because water can break through rock and water can, obviously with flooding, water is not something to be seen as delicate or soft. It can appear that way, but it can also be very, very strong. So that black smoothness, like think of water at night where it appears black and kind of like just calm. That's kind of that idea, all right? So, all right, this is the Po mask put here against the Bundu mask. And you can see that there is in Africa in general, some things that are considered to be ideal, not in terms of what is beautiful in the face, but in terms of what is beautiful in the spirit. It's not about showing beauty in terms of how a person looks, but in terms of how they are. So that's why these are stylized. And you can see here that just like with the Po mask, you have, like, this is a good continuity, is African masks across the board when it comes to women tend to have closed eyes and small mouth, right? So kind of that idea of downcast, calm, serene, very contemplative of themselves. Now you'll notice here that this actually has almost looks like triple or double chins. And on the Bundu mask, that would have actually been a good thing because it would basically say that this person has enough body fat to have children. And actually, because if you are underweight, it is more difficult to conceive. But if you are at a healthy weight and you have more body fat, it is actually easier to have a baby. So therefore, this would be like, this is a fertile woman. This is a woman who can bless the village and her husband with children. So if you look at the Bundu masks, all right, a couple of things about it. So what would happen is, I just think this is kind of cool. These girls that you can see here who are going through this initiation right in the Sunday Society, they would be taken into the woods in seclusion and they would be painted white because in that it was showing, like, to them, the black skin was beautiful. So they're almost making them ugly in this way and stripping away their physical beauty because they're like, we're not worried about your physical beauty. We're worried about your inner beauty. That is what this is about, is what type of person you're going to be, not what you're going to look like. And these masks, in the final part of this ceremony, when these girls are ready to enter the community, kind of like a debutante ball in a way, of saying, hey, they're ready for marriage, but not because just of what their body is doing, but because they know who they are as women in this village, right? So you would go out, you would have your face painted, you would go through this, and the Sunday Society was all female and it was very secretive. And then they would bring the girls back and then they would go through this dance and initiation, right? So I like this, that small mouth doesn't gossip, and it had really small ears because they don't listen to gossip. So it's stylized. It's not meant to look realistic. And then the glistening black of the skin is purity and beauty. Now you'll also see that underneath the eyes, it looks like they have some like tattoos and scarring underneath it. And I'll explain that in just a second. So a couple years ago, the movie Black Panther actually came out. And whenever the costume designers of Black Panther were figuring out, what the costumes were going to look like, they drew a lot of inspiration from the African masks. And you can actually see here on the character on the right that she has like the dotted scarring, even though that's just painted on. And notice that the hair is pulled up and kind of rough around this, and then the skin is very black and smooth. That's something they would have taken influence from these masks. So this is kind of a delicate topic that some people say borders on abuse, because they will do this on even babies. And there's people who consider it to be very inhumane. But in Africa, scarification, which is where you create wounds that you know will scar in a particular way, that's actually considered a very important part of their culture. So in Polynesian cultures, like in Moana, if you've seen that, it's the tattoos that are very significant of who a person is and their status. And if you've watched Moana, his tattoos show the different things that he did in his life. But they don't do that as well in African cultures because the ink doesn't show up as well on the darker skin. So scarification, which is much more visible, these scars were basically like a biography on somebody's face. It was kind of like the tattoos were on Maui, that the scars could tell you their status, milestones they've reached, that this is a woman eligible of marriage, that they have achieved something great. It could also signify, this is a little bit barbaric, that if a woman could sit through this pain, it could mean she's ready to have the pain of childbirth. Like, she can handle this, then she can handle having a baby. It's like she's tough. She's going to survive. She's a good choice for a bride. Another thing that they looked at is that sometimes after like a period of war or a period of difficulty, they would use scarification because scars heal the wounds of trauma. So it would be like, hey, this shows that you've gone from being a victim to a survivor. But either way, the scars that they would have that we often see in masks could denote to somebody looking at them, oh, this person is tough, this person has gone through really tough things, this person is ready for childbirth, she's given birth to sons, things like that. So this is another one of the Bundu masks, and this one's not on the 250, but you can see it's pretty typical of the Bundu mask that it's got. Oh, and by the way, another thing to look at is an elaborate hairstyle would mean that you had the time or the luxury to sit and have your hair done like this, so it would kind of show a little bit of high status. If you had a very elaborate hairstyle. This one, if you notice, actually came from, I think, the British Museum, or Portugal, I can't remember which one, and it's got a top hat on it, which means they had been exposed to European cultures. So since having one of those top hats on was, high wealth in Europe, they kind of adopted the same thing with this particular Bundu mask. So here you can see the Sunday Society, and over here is where Sierra Leone is. So you can see how the water is part of it, and the masks are sitting on top of their head with a headdress around it, and then you can see that the raffia and the plant material that's covering them, that sounds like the waves and the rushes, is covering their face and their body, so they can see that during the dance. And this is part of the Sunday Society and the group that's inducting women into society. Now, yes, there were going to be masks for men too, and just like with the women, where it's not really portraying a certain person, it's portraying a particular idea, it's going to be the same thing. They're very stylized and not meant to look realistic because they're conveying a bigger idea. And as we've seen, the Bundu masks from the Mende people and the Sunday Society are different because they're actually worn by women in kind of this initiation rite. But typically, the masks are going to be worn by men. And in Cameroon, we have the elephant masks, right? And these elephant masks, if you look at them, go from the top of the head all the way down to the feet. Like, they are extremely elaborate and very, very, very prestigious because of all the beading that is on it. Because to get beads like this, the Bamileke and the Bamileke had access to getting beads from Europeans, especially like glass beads, which is not something that they actually had. So to have the mask meant that you had the access to Europe, which meant you were of pretty high status because not anybody could get their hands on these beads to make this kind of mask. So just like we have the Sunday Society in Sierra Leone, the Khoisan Society in Cameroon, they are the only ones who can have these masks. So control of art actually can show status. Like, for example, in Ghana with the golden stool, like the king can decide, the Asante Hana, can decide on who has art and what gets made into art. And the Khoisan Society, like, this was a big status thing. Like to be able to have these masks and to get these masks made, like it's a big deal. So it separated the, elite from the average individual. So why the elephant mask? Well, let's think about it. Elephants are huge and they're very wise. They remember a lot and they're very emotional creatures. That's why they have an incredible memory and this huge brain that tends to remember everything. So they're considered to be very wise. In fact, they have found that if a pack of elephants has an older female, they're more likely to survive because that female is going to remember where water is in like a drought better than like just the young elephants would. So you have these tribes that are ruled by men in Cameroon. And so wearing this, like basically instead of a lion being like the king of the jungle, in this particular case, it's the elephant is the king. So these kings are larger than life, just like the elephants. They have that much power. And African elephants, I believe, actually have the bigger ears. I think Indian elephants have the smaller ears, but the longer tusks. I can't remember which one. I used to know this. So you have the big ears, which signify that it's definitely an elephant because the trunk isn't going to really be as possible. So the ears would be the giveaway that this is an elephant. So basically, in order to be in this society, you had to give gifts to the king. Like that's basically how you did it. So the king, who would have these very nice things, this kind of demonstrates his power and what he has and the fact that he can approve of someone to have a mask like this made and to be in this Khoisan society. Kind of like in England, they have this thing called the Order of the Garter that is extremely old. And the king and queen can decide who gets to be in the Order of the Garter, and you kind of get it by sucking up to the king and queen, at least back in the day. I think today it's if you do some kind of great service, but back in the day it was how much you kissed up to the king. Then you got to be in the Order of the Garter, and you got to wear the garter, and now it's, you give the king all these nice things like leopard skins and elephant tusks, and he gets a mask and you get the right to wear a mask and have one made. Otherwise, you were a fraud and you could get in really big trouble of that. So here you can see what they look like. And you notice that there's not really a big trunk, which we would recognize as elephants because it kind of gets in the way of the presentation. So the ears were a very important part of this. And it's the fact that all of these are made up of leather and beads, right? Which is lots and lots and lots of teeny tiny beads to make this. The longer it takes something to be made, and if you have it, it shows your status. So let's take a look at some of the details of this elephant mask in a little bit more detail.
We're in the Brooklyn Museum looking at this magnificent beaded mask.
This mask is covered in beads. It was danced by the members of the Elephant Society, the Khoisan Society, in the Bamileke Kingdom of Cameroon.
Cameroon is a country in Central Africa, but we're seeing this object hermetically sealed within plexiglass in a museum, completely divorced from the way that it would have been used and understood in its original context.
This was a masquerade, which involved not just a mask, but a costume, performers, musicians, and attendants to bring this mask to life, to do what it was really supposed to do in terms of honoring the king and bringing about social harmony.
So we should not be seeing it frozen, hung, as if it was just a piece of cloth.
This object was obviously collected and has now a second life in this museum space. It's very hard for us to recontextualize its original use, but we know from photographs that the Bamileke Society would wear these with a red feather headdress, a leopard skin pelt, and a full-body costume. The leopard and the elephant were symbols of rule and powerful symbols for the fawn. The fawn was a divine king who could transform into the elephant, and the leopard was thought to be an animal that could transform into a human. So we have that connection between divine rule and the essence of these powerful animals.
So the Bamileke that would have worn this would have been court officials, title holders, warriors, people that held themselves great power, and in their association with the leopard and with the elephant would have expressed the power of the king, and in a sense the political stability of that hierarchical order.
The Bamileke king, the faun, allowed this society, and only this one, to dance the elephant mask and to wear leopard skin. They were entrusted with these symbols of authority and power. The main form in this beaded piece is the isosceles triangle, which relates to the patterning on the body of the leopard.
Highly stylized, though, as the entire mask is. It's dazzling, and it has a kind of optical quality that is full of energy and dynamism.
And imagine when it's worn and danced and performed, it would be incredibly dynamic with all of these various materials and colors and shapes all brought together to suggest the power of that king.
And in Cameroon today, the Bamileke still perform this ritual, now annually, but instead of warriors performing it, these are powerful members of the society.
Okay, so again, this was not meant to just be something that was owned or possessed. It was meant to be used in a ceremony that demonstrated, power. And again, in this culture, it almost seems like in Latin America, it's the jaguar, and in this particular culture, it's the leopard. So you have this combination in the beading and the way that it's created of two totally different animals that symbolize power. So you've got the leopard, and then you also the leopard spots, and then you also have the ears, the giant wisdom of the elephant and the size. And even the different colors of the beads can mean different things. So like the red of fertility or the red of bloodshed, the black living and the dead, the white of the ancestors of those who've gone before. So even the pattern of the beading had meaning to it. So we have also seen masks that were not necessarily meant to honor somebody who was a ruler, but just really honor and revere a particular person, because African cultures have held on to ancestor worship for a very, very long time. And it's not uncommon in East Asia, especially in China, ancestor worship, Japan, still a very, very big thing. Places that practice Confucianism, that idea of the ancestors being the ones that communicate with the spirit world and who can interfere in your life. It's a pretty prominent belief, and African cultures definitely still held on to that a lot and still do with East Asian cultures as well. So these masks that we're going to look at right here by the Bauli people were created to honor a specific important person. That's what makes them a little bit more unique. All right, so I want to make sure you guys understand that. The Bundu masks that we looked at are unique because females could wear those, and that was new. These right here are significant because these were actually created to be honoring a specific person, not an idea, still kind of an idea of what made that person awesome, but revering somebody who had already proven themselves awesome. So this is a blow portrait mask, all right? Again, portrait because it's of a specific person. And this is on the Ivory Coast. And like the Puel masks, these were worn by men, right? The only ones that we've really talked about are the Bundu mask that females could wear. So let's talk about what would help you identify this as an African mask. Small ears, small mouth, geometric shapes that could represent scarring, or it could highlight different parts of the face. The shape around the eyes to kind of show the ability to see into other worlds and communicate with ancestors. The down, closed eyes kind of showing humility. Broad forehead to show wisdom. And then, these elaborate hairstyles, and then the crown on top of the head. So these masks were created to honor a specific individual within the community through a dance. And typically, at the end of this huge, it's almost like an opera that would happen. At the end of the opera, the person whose face it was that was being honored would come out and dance. So why would these people be honored? Because of their character, because of their achievements. Sometimes it would be their beauty or their dancing skills, whatever it was. They were obviously, worthy enough of being honored that they would get to have a mask made in their likeness. And because they are so important, only the best dancers in the village would, and remember, the dances are so important because they convey ideas or they have to do with rituals. It's not just like, oh, I can just dance really good. No, there's a purpose to these dances, so therefore it has to be like the best dancers. So again, notice how smooth the materials are. Like, you don't see them blemished or rough. right? They're smooth, unwrinkled, unstressed, showing that kind of, the beauty of that smooth skin. And then the downcast, respectful eyes. So this particular mask that they put on here was chosen for these masks because they actually were able to get a picture of not only the person who created it, but the person who wore it, and then the person that it was for at the same time, which is extremely rare because a lot of the times when you find these masks, the person it was made for is already long gone. So her mask was made for her and it was worn by her husband and then her sons. And she would dance in the ceremony until she couldn't anymore. So here we can see this right here, that this is Moya Yanso is the woman on the right. Well, it would be the right, so our left, and then showing that this was actually her. So it was made for her, and it would be worn by her son or her husband earlier, and then she would dance and be part of that because it's actually honoring a specific individual. And whenever dances weren't going on, these things were put away. They were not for display. The Bundu masks that we talked about were kept in the home of a female elder. They were not meant to be out and looked at because they were for a specific reason. All right, so we've talked a lot about art that honors females, which I think is amazing because where have we really seen a whole lot of art that honors females for just being amazing? Like, we really haven't seen that a whole lot. But we do have to focus on the fact that there is some artwork in Africa that does focus specifically on males, right? And men in Africa had ideals as well. And the artwork was meant to kind of reinforce that this is what you're supposed to be as a male, just like the art did with the masks of what it meant to be a female. So the Igbo, right? And I kind of like putting this after the blow portrait mask because both of those are about individual achievement instead of for the good of the society. They're more about individuals and what you as a person are going to do. So the Igbo, if you look right here, also located in West Africa. And why are we getting so many pieces from West Africa? Because that's where the Europeans were. More than any place else, West Africa, Central Africa, and South Africa. That's where they were whenever they were imperializing, so that's why we have so many pieces from this area. So the Igbo, and this is a really easy way to remember this from West Africa, had the Ikenga, which also starts with an I. And these were shrine statues, which could either be communal, so they could be made for the entire community to worship, but most of the time they were meant to be very personal and put in your home. Kind of like the Marode altarpiece from Europe. Like that was supposed to be a personal object that was created for personal worship. These were most of the time too. And the Ikenga shrine figures, because they were usually put on a shrine for like prayer and reflection, what they were meant to do is represent what it was that a man needed to be in order to achieve greatness. So the emphasis with the Ikenga is always the right hand, because to them, the right hand was the source of strength. That's what you held your plow with. It's what you held your sword with. Your right hand was your most powerful tool. So you'll notice here that in the right hand, it holds the weapon, all right? And it's definitely stylized because there's definitely parts of the body that are not anatomically correct at all. But the head has that large forehead for wisdom. Again, the downcast eyes so that we can be humble at the same time. The bigger the horns, the more powerful you were. Like the idea was bigger horns, extremely powerful, like you mess with the bull, you get the horns kind of thing. And these were made of much stronger materials, not just some softer wood, because, with women, softer features, softer females, softer materials. With these guys, it was tough. And notice it's not smoothed down, it's gritty, it's meant to be rough and tough, just like the guys were supposed to be. So this would actually have 3 different parts to it that it would focus on. There'd be a personal god, and then there was the ancestors, which is extremely important because you want to call on them to teach you, and then the right hand, which is where everything that was so powerful would happen. So here's another one of them, and you can always recognize the Ikenga Igbo by the horns. Right, so like the big horns. This one would actually probably be for communal, like for the community, because they would need a reminder of how powerful they should be as a group. But usually, like the other ones, they were meant to be in the home of the person who commissioned it. And then just a visual reminder that power comes from hard work and being a good person. So not just going out killing people, but it comes from being a good person, using that right hand for all the right reasons of, holding the, the plow and the sword and knowing when to use both. So these were kind of there to convey those ideas, not like, it's not like they were holding up a picture of a great leader and going, here, be like him. Europe did that, like Louis the 14th, like, here, be like this guy. No, this was be this. Be powerful, be strong, be kind, know when to use your power. Again, about an idea, not an individual. So finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about is just to add on a little bit more of that ancestor worship that is such an important part of so many African cultures below the Sahara Desert. Because remember, north of the Sahara Desert is much more Islamic, so that's a completely different culture set. But south of the Sahara Desert, especially in the Bantu cultures, your entire community was bound together by your ancestral lineage that you shared, that you were married together through ancestors, that you traced back to common ancestors, which was very important because that could also be how you got your right to rule, is through your ancestors. But not just that, but by showing that you had the values of your ancestors. So ancestors, again, why did they pray to them? Because that's who they believed were responsible. They were the ones that just died. So therefore they, or had died. So they were the ones who could talk to the spirits for them. So they could make sure that there was fertility, that there was food, they could provide guidance. We even saw that in the Nkisi in Conde, where they would take little pieces of ashes from the deceased and put them inside the spirit to kind of ask, what do we do? So like we've seen in other cultures, the group that we're going to talk about called the Fang were actually nomadic. They moved around from place to place, which means they didn't have a site where they could go and like worship their ancestors. So they would cremate their ancestors, or sometimes keep like the skull and then the ashes together, and they would put them in a box, a very sealed wooden box that they would carry around with them. So they would have their ancestors with them at all time. It also, they believed, if they kept it in the box, kept the ancestor kind of contained so that it couldn't go and get lost and like wreak all kinds of havoc. Very, very similar to Egypt in the fact that they believed that the body could still contain the soul. That's why they mummified. This isn't mummifying, it's just making sure the ashes stayed with you because they were a nomadic group. So these two works right here, right? The left one is called the Fang, which is the tribe, Byeri, right? Which is a reliquary figure. So I like to compare that to this one on the right that we saw from the Saint Foy. This is a reliquary that held the bones of a saint within a church that they believed had special powers that they would pray to within the Catholic Church. Well, this is kind of the same thing, except the one on the right actually looks closer to being like Saint Foy, and the one on the left is not. It's about an idea in terms of how they made it. So this little dude right here, okay, these guys were the Fang. They were nomadic and they were always on the move. And because of that, they were always getting into it with other tribes, and they were kind of hunter-gatherers. So they relied on the ancestors to make sure that they protected them. So they would have their little box of ashes, and then sitting on the box of the ashes, and you can see like this little guy's legs are bent, like he would be sitting with his legs hanging over the box. He is sitting on the box protecting the ashes, right? He's got a very important person or a very important job to do. So they would have these boxes of the ashes, and these little reliquary figures would sit on the bark box because they're made of trees, the wood. And notice that while we've seen all these other things that have their eyes closed, this has its eyes open. And the idea is that it can see danger coming, it can see into the next world and communicate with the ancestors. And it would also kind of like, if you stared at it, it was supposed to make you look away from the box, like to basically scare people off from the box with the ancestors' ashes within it. So they believed that because this was wood, which was porous, because things can like seep into wood, that the soul of the ancestors could actually come in to these and empower them to protect the ancestors and the living. And basically, like, this was, you could talk to the Byeri and be talking to the ancestors at the same time, because in a way the ancestors have like come in to the Byeri. Now, why does it look stylized the way that it does? Well, you'll see that parts of it look like an adult and parts of it look like a child, like the umbilical cord. They're in the middle. Well, that's because this represents that cycle of life and death. All right. So you've got parts of it that are a newborn, and you've got parts of it that are aged and an adult, because it's that cycle of life and death that these are protecting. They're protecting those who have passed and those who are living, and ensuring that there's going to be fertility. And they would frequently cover these with palm oil and make sure that they were nice and smooth, to make sure that they stayed well preserved, because they had such an important function. So it's got features of an infant, like little arms, little legs, and then the face is almost like the way they used to show baby Jesus during the Middle Ages, but this was for a deeper reason. Like it was because of that idea of life and death, and the connection between the two. So we are now done with African art, and next we will move into finish this unit, North American art, where we're going to see the interaction between native cultures in North America and the Europeans that arrive.